Hey guys, I'm Wendy J. Olson, a healing coach and founder and executive director of Grit Plus Gumption. And I have the privilege today of being with my friend Abigail of the Abolitionist Collective. Thank you so much for hanging with me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you guys. It's going to be good.
So, for people that don't know who you are, that don't have the privilege of knowing who you are, can you tell them like a little bit about you, what you do, your background in the anti-trafficking movement? And then, of course, we want to hear about the Abolitionist Collective.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Abigail Eernisse. I have been being a part of the anti-trafficking movement for about 10 years now. And I actually started out on a not so great Christian mission trip and was launched into serving women in red light districts and brothels. But that time taught me a lot and really gave me a passion for social justice, even beyond what I had before. So following that, I ended up going to school and continuing to work in the movement in various different lanes. So I did prevention work, awareness, intervention, was trying to just get my footing and learn how I could best serve survivors and also raise awareness about something that I felt was so incredibly egregious as an injustice in our world today. And I wanted to be a part of shifting that and changing the cultural mindsets around it. So worked in that for a long time, did a lot of stuff internationally and now locally. And the Abolitionist Collective was birthed out of 2020 quarantine. How many of us came up with ideas during that time? And it was really just, how can I fill some of the gaps that I see in the anti-trafficking field, which I felt was a lot of awareness work wasn't geared toward my generation. So I am in between that millennial Gen Zer age. And so I felt like there was work to be done in reaching that demographic so that we could actually make a difference for the future. And then also in the intervention space of really reaching out to people who are in the commercial sex industry locally. And so those are the two things that really got stirred in me and the reason I started the Abolitionist Collective, which really we work primarily on education and intervention.
Yeah. I have to say, you're the wealth of wisdom in this area. Like if there's anything new or I have questions about anything or like, even just 6 years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, this was a completely different story. You know what I mean? And how it's ebbed and flowed and then morphed and evolved into this now. And I feel like you have your finger like on the nose or whatever you call it of like knowing what's happening right now and then bringing that forth in like an enlightening and wise way that it makes sense to people, that it also can like nudge some people that need a good nudging. And having said that, I mean, you made an amazing post. Was it January?
Thank you.
Yeah, in January.
January 11th, I had to be on the nose of Anti-Human Trafficking Awareness Day. I said, okay, I have something to say.
Yes. And I loved it. I never thought like, it's just one of those things that you just bring to light in what you do. It's like one of your gifts. And it was around the phrase, modern day slavery, which we've all used in the anti-trafficking movement. It's one of those like buzzwords, right? And how it's actually harming the anti-trafficking movement. And I just love to hear more about, or even just for you to explain it more in detail. One of the posts that you used is the word, you say the use of the word modern also implies that slavery today is somehow different or less severe than the slavery of the past. Can you tell us like more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what honestly sparked this? So I mean, right, I've been doing this for 10 years. And so very much so when I first started, there were only really a couple big organizations that were working locally and globally to, combat human trafficking and sex trafficking. And a lot of those organizations use this terminology, and that's the terminology that I adopted. I never really thought anything of it. But honestly, it was the deeper that I got into my anti-racist journey and the more I started to learn from experts in that field. And obviously, with it being thrust into the spotlight in 2020, it's been something that I've been mulling over a lot for the last few years. Obviously, recognizing also that I did name what I do, the Abolitionist Collective. And so actually really grappling with all of that language and thinking about what is this helpful? Is it harmful? And so there was just a stirring in me, honestly. And that's kind of how this post was birthed. And I think one of the things that's hard is, right, we have human trafficking is the largest social justice issue of our time, right? It's the largest growing criminal enterprise. It's huge. And so I think it's hard because sometimes when we're looking backward at chattel slavery, and we're looking forward today, it's like they're similar, but they're not the same. And it almost feels to me kind of like when you get into a room of people and it's like everybody's trying to play the trauma Olympics of like who has more pain. And I'm like, I'm not sure that's actually helping us get the point across that we want to get across, right? Because I think it's what you said, it's a buzzword, it's for shock value. But if we, especially in North America, don't have a full understanding or acknowledgement, or even dare I say repentance or restitution for what chattel slavery was, I've started to wonder, does it really connotate what we think it does? And also, honestly, just very candidly, in my conversations with Black people in my community and BIPOC in general, I was hearing this common theme that was a point of deep discomfort with
Hmm.
the anti-trafficking movement. And I was like, if it's hindering people from understanding what the movement's about, right? Because I've been in this movement for a long time and I can say I don't think it's intentional. I don't think people are intentionally trying to be hurtful or harmful in this way. I think it's just that we haven't considered this.
Right.
So yeah, that's why. That's the
And if
why
it's a
behind it. Yeah.
hindrance, why don't we just get rid of it or change it? I mean, we talk
Yeah.
about language being so important, being able to name things,
Yeah.
but also using vocabulary that is not harmful to
Mhm.
masses of people. Why don't
Yeah.
we change that or change the way,
Yes.
consider someone else's perspective, someone else's feelings, even in the matter of like, okay, this seems like, even it's harming just like one or two people, then maybe
Mhm.
then maybe everyone else is quiet. But these two people have a
Yeah.
point. They spoke up
Yeah.
and they said something. So I love that you brought that up. For people that
Mhm.
don't know, you mentioned chattel. Did I say it right? It's
Yeah, you did.
Chattel, chattel
Yep.
slavery. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So you'll hear the term chattel slavery or the transatlantic slave trade. Sometimes this can be used interchangeably. It's basically the most common slave type term or words known to Americans. So it's the time when Black people were considered legal property in the U.S. And that was lawful and allowed in the United States and by European powers from the 16th to the 18th century. So that's really what it's referring to. And thankfully, obviously, that has been abolished. But that's generally what we're talking, not generally, that is what we're talking about when we reference chattel slavery. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, for sure.
So why the distinction? We've talked a little bit already about why vocabulary, why language is important.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear why it's important to you.
Yeah. So it is important because as you guys do at Grit and Gumption, are committed to being anti-racist. And so, as I continued to hear this common theme, and I would love to just tell a story. So I was in a conversation with, and this has happened multiple times, right? So as I said, since 2020, I've been mulling this over. So it's been about 3 years of me just thinking about this and starting to ask questions specifically to, the BIPOC in my life, but also really intentionally to Black people about what their connotations were around the anti-trafficking movement. Because I had been right in for 10 years coming into rooms, being here, noticing I'm the only Black person here. Why am I the only Black person here? And it not always having to do so much with the demographic of even the country or the um, you know, place that I'm in or the conference that I'm in. It was getting to be a little weird. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna start asking some questions. And what I was getting from the community was, well, I feel like the way like trafficking, isn't that just like white evangelicals? Like, isn't that like a white evangelical thing that people do that
Mm.
isn't like for us? Like, and like they're always saying it's slavery, and like I'm not really sure that that's slavery. Like, I don't understand. And so I was realizing there's this huge disconnect. And the thing that kept coming up in that disconnect was the language.
Mm.
And so I was like, if that language is creating a barrier, exactly what you said, then why are we using it?
Yeah.
And then I started to think about how it also could hinder the ability for survivors to identify themselves as actually being trafficked or sexually exploited, because we keep using this terminology slavery, and we have this one picture. Like, I'm sure everyone listening right now has probably a picture that is closer to chattel slavery in their brain when they think of slavery. And it's the chains, and it's the ropes, and it's the duct tape. And right, for years, survivors have been telling us those pictures don't represent us. That's not what is actually happening. But I was like, I think there's some barriers here with identification for survivors, with the way that BIPOC communities in general are relating to the term slavery, and then with what the movement is presenting. And I think that when that disconnect continues to exist, we hinder ourselves from having more diverse people at the table. Now, whether or not everybody wants more diversity at the table, or if they just say they do, is a whole other, probably a whole other podcast.
It's a whole nother episode.
A whole other episode. But that is a thing that I continue to see. And we know, right, that Black women specifically and Black girls are overrepresented in human trafficking across the board. And so if we really are going to serve the communities of people who we are actively, saying that we are coming to bat for in this injustice, then I think we have to start acknowledging the way in which the marketing and the sensationalism of the way that we might be saying things and doing things are actually either helping or hindering people from identifying, getting the services they need, and what our environments look like. Like, are they even safe, right? Because we've had these conversations before, like, can we even feel confident inviting a Black woman who's a survivor or coming out of the life into that space if we're not really so sure if those people are engaging in the anti-racism and anti-trafficking? And I would say that they have to go together.
Yes.
If you want lasting, sustainable change.
Yes. Along with your own healing, anti-racism work needs to be a part of that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You talked about like just talking to survivors in general, and like, I'm sure that you've developed relationships I know you have, but like, can you tell us, like, after speaking with so many survivors, what the narrative around anti-trafficking movement versus the actual experience of survivors? Do you have like a specific story, or just several examples of how these two are totally different entities?
Yeah. So I think it comes back a lot to the sort of ideas we have around what is even trafficking, right? So like, I haven't met maybe you have. I haven't met a single trafficking survivor in 10 years who was kidnapped, right?
Yeah.
But that's like one of the predominant narratives of what trafficking is that you've been kidnapped and snatched. Okay, that's only 2% of trafficking survivors, so not the majority. And I think also just these ideas of, right, we could go into who really actually purchases people, right? Who are really the sex buyers. I think that oftentimes we think those aren't the people that are in our neighborhoods, and they really are. And so that's something that is also a huge thing. So there are like these various realities of things we think that trafficking is, and then what it actually is. And I think for survivors, what I've noticed is there's a lot of diversity in who is being trafficked, right? And I mean that in socioeconomic status, in ethnic background, in orientation. There's tons of diversity. Like, in that space, there's not as much diversity reflected in organizations, and who's leading the charge, who's receiving women. And oftentimes that is a barrier, right? Because if you don't see anybody in the room who looks like you, that is uncomfortable, just off the bat. And then you also have the trauma of the trafficking. And so it just creates a hindrance oftentimes if you don't feel like anybody in that space can relate to you. And I think that everyone in the movement would agree that we want it to be easier, not harder, for survivors to get the services and the support that they need. And so, yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
When a person is coming out of a traumatic situation, already they're not going to trust anybody. So getting them to feel safe in a space where they can maybe offer up a little trust flag to see if it's going to be shot down. I mean, that's essential. Otherwise, it only gives them a reason to keep going back. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We go back to what we know, what's familiar, even if it's harmful.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
I know we've seen that time and time again.
Yeah.
So speaking of the anti-trafficking movement, how do you feel like this post was received
Yeah, so
overall?
it was split. So it got, I mean, I don't know what it was. It was a good amount of likes. Good amount of traction, got shared a bunch. Half the people were super like, wow, I really had never thought about this. I'm learning something. You put words to something that I hadn't, thought about before. I got a lot of private DMs from Black people, and specifically Black women, who were like, thank you so much for saying something. I've been wanting to say something for years and I just didn't want to do it. and then I was very honest. I was scared. I was actually scared to press like post. I was like,
Post,
this
yeah.
is going to be,
We've
this
all
is
been
going to
there.
be this is going to be a little bit of a thing. And then the other half of people were like, really? Does it really matter? Isn't it all slavery? Isn't it all different forms of slavery? And I understand, because I've been on that journey of like, well, is it sort of like a tomato situation? Like, is this something that really matters? But again, it's like the increase of that anti-racist journey. And I think the further that I've gone down that road and the more questions I've asked, right, because I'm African, like by birth, like I'm grown up in America, but I don't have that African and adopted, so I don't necessarily have that connection to the African American experience, those grandmas and grandpas and aunties and uncles who are able to have that shared collective experience where they're talking about memories that are still from, right, chattel slavery. And so I think as I've listened and expanded my perspective, that is really what the shift has been for me. And so I think those specifically are what shifted. And I think that the people who have done that work were the people who really related to it. And I think maybe the people who haven't done that work or feel like the need, I think you have to interrogate what does it feel like the need is to say that it's slavery? Like, what is the harm in having distinction in forced labor, domestic servitude, sexual exploitation, really individualizing things? I think sometimes brings clarity. I really do. And there's that German philosopher that says, like, the limits of my language is the limits of my world. And I think it's helpful. Like, if you're really talking about, I want to make sure that the person who made this jacket, garment worker, was paid fairly, then let's say garment worker. Is it truly more helpful to say slave? I think in most cases, if we really thought about it, we would say no. But oftentimes it's easier because, let's be real, nonprofit world is hard. Social justice world is hard. It's just easier to copy and paste things. But I think we have to ask ourselves, at what cost, and who then are we not representing in the way that we're doing our marketing, and understanding too the way that that affects the public's connotations. And we've seen that with right, the way that the sensationalized images have driven the public to kind of think trafficking is this one way. And now we're continually, all of us are spending a lot of our time pushing back against that propaganda. And so I think if we are coming into, hopefully, I'm hopeful, and with Gen Z on the rise, that we're coming into an era where we understand intersectionality more. We understand that, right, really and truly, I don't believe that the commercial sex industry would exist as it does today in North America without chattel slavery being what it was, and leading into the fancy girl trade, which was the beginning of the sexual exploitation of primarily light-skinned Black preteen girls. And so I think just the understanding those layers is so helpful in really moving forward. And the pushback that I got, again, I feel like it's from people who maybe are not on that anti-racist journey, which, to be very honest, in this movement, it's really only a handful of people. Most people who do anti-trafficking work are really on it with pretty much all social justice issues. So the handful of people, I'm just like, be blocked and blessed.
Setting that firm boundary. This is the line. You've crossed
Like,
it. I will leave you over there with
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I think as we grow and learn, I've heard this like phrase a lot, and it always goes like to the forefront of my brain. Like, ignorance at this point in the world is a choice. You can know anything for the most part. by picking the phone up out of your pocket and looking it up yourself.
Mhm.
Finding trusted resources, of course, can be a hindrance, but for the most part, you can trace back who first said this thing.
Yeah.
And if that person was a toxic person in light of today's
Yeah.
world events and culture, we probably don't want to be using that
Yeah.
person's words.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so we need to know the origin of things. We need to
Mhm.
know the meaning of things. We need to know the right vocabulary and language. And also we need to make sure that the vocabulary and language that we do choose is not harming people.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And all be
100%.
all, period. Sentence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, look at the fruit, like look at the fruit, that's to borrow like some Christian ease. Look at the outcomes of people's work. You can look at, I could think of some big name organizations right now who maybe their language is like not quite what I would prefer it to be, but I can consciously see they're doing distinct anti-racist things inside their anti-trafficking organization. So I'm like, okay, all right, well, and so that's where there's like this freedom. I think I want to give people freedom to be like, you don't have to be all the way there tomorrow. It's just sort of the journey, being willing to walk
Yes.
the journey and understanding the perspectives. I think is the crucial part, and being willing to, if you're asking yourself like, man, why don't more people of color engage in what we're doing? Maybe this is part of the reason. And I think that that's a worthy question to be asked, right? Like, that's sort of going beyond just like we like diversity, equity, inclusion, and like actually actually thinking about and putting into practice, like, okay, is this actually a part of our actual cultural
Our
reality
hearts.
inside our organization? Yeah, exactly. The heart of the organization.
This is not one of those times where we're like, listen, it's all in or all out. It's black or it's white. It's
Yeah.
perfection or complete and utter failure.
Yeah.
We can
No.
give grace to those that we already know are on the road.
Yes.
Stay on the road, stay on the path. No one is like
Yes.
trying to judge you harshly or cancel you, because you accidentally used the wrong word. You may not know, but once you know, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. And are you making the changes to grow in the direction of progress?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's so important, because my heart with the post was never to be like, all right, guys, this is your reckoning. I was like, no, I was
from
like,
now on, I'm tagging all of you who use this word. No,
you're just gonna be please don't do that on the post. No, it was more of like, I asked, did this challenge you? Like, did you learn something, and did you unlearn something? That's kind of my whole my whole thing. And
your whole
when
shtick.
tell you, like, did you learn something and unlearn something? Like, then I think that we're in a good place if we're going to be endlessly curious about different perspectives and committed to changing for the better. And you might not see the results of that really like overnight, but I know that in the long term you will, because these are the things that I look for when I'm looking for where I want to lend my voice and where I want to put my energy in this movement, and where I want to recommend for other Black and brown people to do the same, because I'm like, all right, now I know I can put you in this environment. You're going to be safe. You're going to be heard. The wholeness of your humanity, because that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about seeing the wholeness of someone's humanity and the wholeness of their story, not asking them to fragment themselves further, or feel like, they have to perform in any way to be able to show up into the room and to have their perspective and voice honored, no matter how they sound, what they look like, all those things. It's accepting them in their uniqueness.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for talking about this with me today. Can you just like let people know where to find you, where to follow you, give them all the details and how to subscribe? Because you guys have to subscribe to the Abolitionist Collective. Her emails are the best. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I want to say too, like, grit and gumption is the real deal. I really, really love what you guys are doing. It's so incredibly important for survivors. When I'm talking about like, oh, I feel confident and comfortable sending literally anybody to grit and gumption, it's so true. And that is not
that is a rarity, honestly. So please know that these guys are the real deal. And you can find me at Abigail Eernisse on all of the social media places, Instagram, TikTok, all of that. And then the Abolitionist Collective is at the Abolitionist Collective, and then also just www.theabolitionistcollective.com. You can subscribe to our newsletter. We send out educational updates on the weekly to people, and we're mostly on the Instagram and the TikTok world. That is really where we are at. So yeah, follow us. We love to hopefully help educate. We're talking all about this, especially the next 8 days of the month, because it's Black History Month right now. And yeah, so thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful for you guys.
Thank you.